Hello and thanks for joining us for Sustaining Us here on KLCS PBS. I'm David Nazar. They are known as majestic creatures, an elegant predator, a highly social animal, a symbol of the wilderness. We're talking about gray wolves. The once abundant population of wolves centuries ago has today dwindled to almost nothing here in the U.S., relatively speaking. How has that happened over the many decades, and why is this still happening these days? We travel to Southern California, then through the West and on out to Montana to find out about the campaign to save the gray wolf. And that's where we begin our broadcast. This is Team Wolf. Peter Kariva, Samantha Atwood, Kevin Alice, Jeff Ewelt. 4 people, 4 stories, all working together with a common cause. Their goal, to save the gray wolf. Team Wolf says much of the gray wolf population is now extinct. Experts estimate there are just a few thousand wolves left in the entire continental United States. And in recent years, they say, several states have begun an even more aggressive killing campaign against wolves.
Wolves have been persecuted throughout history, so they've been, shot from airplanes, bow and arrow, many different guns, night vision scopes, snare traps, poison, and so forth. Right now in the continental U.S., they can be trapped. And when they're trapped, it's a pretty cruel fate.
The Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California, and the group Relist Wolves, as well as other organizations, are collaborating on a new project to help save the wolf population. The origin of this project, in part, began with aquarium president and CEO Dr. Peter Kariva. Kariva is also the chief scientist for the Relist Wolves campaign. And he's a conservation biologist as well. Over 2 decades ago, Kariva was involved in a study with wolves, and in his words, the arbitrary and inhumane way human beings were killing wolves.
So the Aquaria Pacific, and like all aquaria and zoos, is really involved in conservation, and we're very much about empathy and getting kids to understand animals and connect to them. So when we see what's happening to the wolves, the same thing happens to species we care about. The same thing happens to the sharks off the coast. The same thing happens to sea otters. So we're in the business of teaching the public what the real fears are of predators and to really connect with animals. So it's pretty natural for us to engage with wolves.
Now, some 20 years later, this has become a political battle of sorts. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had designated the authority of managing the wolf population to the states. However, the states, according to Kariva, have not been properly managing the wolves. In fact, Kariva insists the states do not know how to manage them. Kariva says the net result of this mismanagement has been the overkilling of thousands of wolves who are getting shot in various states throughout the U.S. like Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, for example.
We've learned enough that there's really no scientific reason for this killing campaign. In fact, that's why I got involved with Relist Wolves campaign. So initially, Fish and Wildlife Service took them off the endangered species list because they felt there were enough abundant and that the states would manage them thoughtfully. It's turned out the states have not managed them thoughtfully. I would just like to see us be sensible about wolves and both understand their value to us and don't exaggerate the damage they do.
Kariva explains there's unfortunately not much public data on exactly how many of these wolves are being killed and captured. So now Kariva is on a personal crusade to try and get this data from the federal government through things like public records requests. He also insists humans do not have to be afraid of wolves. He says the government info that's available to validate that claim is extremely vague and lacks any comprehensive or substantive context. Say, for example, information about the deaths of cows, deer, moose, elk, or other livestock as a result of wolves.
Wolves do take livestock, but we have to put it in context. There's 112 million cattle in the U.S. now, 112 million. 4 million a year die of unwanted causes. That's what the ranchers don't want. Out of those 4 million, only 1 in 10,000 is killed by a wolf. So if you're a rancher, of all the things you're going to worry about taking your livestock, wolves should be at the bottom of your list.
So now, Kariva is trying to get the wolves relisted as an endangered species, in part because Kariva says wolves are a vital part of our ecosystem and they should never be shot unless absolutely necessary and there is just no other way if the wolf presents an imminent threat.
Wolves are what biologists call a keystone species. That keystone comes from in an archway, like a stone arch. The keystone sits there and it holds everything in place. And without it, everything falls apart. And in a sense, that's what happens when you take wolves out of an ecosystem. Everything falls apart. Overgrazing, sedimentation of streams, and so forth. The public needs to understand that they really aren't doing that much damage. And in fact, if anything, they're a net plus to ecosystems and to human society.
The Relist Wolves campaign is a national, grassroots coalition of several different organizations and many different people who, simply put, care a lot about wolves. The collaboration includes various conservationists, scientists, non-governmental organizations, even Native American tribes who share the common goal of restoring endangered species and adding safety nets to the gray wolf. Samantha Atwood is with the Relist Wolves campaign.
The Relist Wolves campaign is really focused on breaking out of the conservation echo chamber, where we want to look at things a little bit differently and talk to the public and make people realize they have a voice. Every bit counts, and wolves are really beautiful, majestic, important animals with a family structure a lot like ours. They have parents, they have kids, the parents teach the kids, they're highly social, highly intelligent, and we really want people to see their value from an ecosystem perspective and feel like they want to be part of this conservation success story. Now, we're trying to accomplish this in a number of ways. And really important way is public advocacy and making sure the public is aware of what's going on with the wolves. In Wisconsin, where over 218 wolves were killed in under 60 hours, we thought we have to do something about this. They're being overhunted, and a lot of it is due to fear.
Samantha claims anti-wolf groups, some ranchers, and some hunters throughout the U.S. are perpetuating that fear and in fact making false claims.
Let's start with the ways they're being hunted. It's very cruel, running them down with packs of dogs, ATVs, hunting at night, hunting from helicopters. There's no such thing as a fair fight when it comes to the way wolves are being hunted right now. Now, as to whether they should be hunted at all, we in the campaign personally believe that there are a lot more effective ways to actually manage wolves and to coexist with them, such as fencing. You can have livestock guardian dogs, even flags that put up will keep wolves away. If a cow dies, cleaning it up really quickly so it doesn't attract predators or scavengers. Hunting wolves should be a last resort, and right now it is the first thing people think about, and that is really what is wrong with this situation.
They're a part of who we are. They're a part of the land that shapes who we are as community and as people.
Kevin Alice is the president of Thunderbird Strategic LLC, a government relations organization in Washington, D.C. Kevin is also a lobbyist and the former CEO of the National Congress of American Indians, the oldest American Indian advocacy organization in the U.S. Kevin says the organization exists to make sure the U.S. honors its treaty and trust responsibilities owed to all the U.S. tribal nations.
My grandfather was our tribal chairman through the 1950s and 1960s, one of the most difficult periods for Indian country because it was the termination period where this country was trying to terminate its relations with the tribal nations. And my great-grandfather was our tribal leader at the turn of the last century. So being in front of these issues that affect tribal nations, not only my own community, but those across the country, has been flowing through my blood for several generations. So I'm one of the many foot soldiers. Gray wolf is a very sacred figure in Indian country. It's a part of our ecosystem. It's a part of our environment. It's an animal that our nations have coexisted alongside and have lived with for thousands of years. It's also an animal that is a very, let me call it, religious figure in Indian country. The wolf is a part of almost every tribal community's creation story. From our very beginnings of time, the wolf walked alongside the creators of what we know to be our world today.
Kevin agrees with Peter Kariva that today, wolf conservation is partly a political battle.
This government promised tribal nations when it entered into treaties with hundreds of tribes 150 plus years ago that they would do everything possible to safeguard those things that are important to us. And this is certainly one of those. The existence of the wolf And when we look at the possible things that we could do, you know, we could take this to the court and convince judges. We can take this to legislators and convince them, which we are doing. But one of the most important populations that we really need to get to understand the reality of who the wolf is and what it is not is public opinion. We have seen legislation in the past that has taken a false narrative, has taken bits and pieces of something without all the other information and actually passed legislation that's been detrimental to the wolf.
Jeff Ewelt also says he cannot let that happen. Jeff is the executive director of Zoo Montana in Billings, Montana. Jeff and Zoo Montana are also joining with Relist Wolves to help save wolves.
So Zoo Montana is actively involved with wolf conservation for a couple reasons. First and foremost, as one of the biggest cultural attractions in the state of Montana, we feel the responsibility to do all we can to give a voice to the animals that call our facility home. In this particular instant, wolves are what we're talking about. When we were contacted by the Relist Wolf campaign, it was a no-brainer for us to get involved. Interestingly enough, though, in the state of Montana, getting involved with pro-wolf work is a calculated risk. When we came forward with the fact that we are a pro-wolf organization, as most people would think we are, we received death threats. We also received a threat of loss of funding as well. So it was a risky venture.
A risky venture that Ewelt hopes is going to eventually pay off despite the challenges for Zoo Montana and their own potential danger.
In the state of Montana especially, the wolf debate is a divisive one. It's turned rather political, and unfortunately, wolves are not well liked in our state. And so for that reason, we feel that we need to do what we can in order to get the right information out there. Unfortunately, wolves are victims of misinformation. There is so much misinformation about what wolves are and what they do. And not everybody wants to hear that. And so we feel obligated that we not only need to educate and teach our guests, but we need to work on our legislators that call Montana home, and we need to let them understand that unfortunately, if they eradicate this species, the results of that are going to be devastating.
Ewelt says the wolf dilemma in the Treasure State is partly a matter of dollars and cents.
In Montana, it affects people's pocketbooks, and I think money talks, and I think a lot of the hate that comes from these predators are because of that, whether it's affecting a local ranch or it may be affecting a hunter and their ability to get that trophy elk. Again, there's that misinformation when in reality what wolves are doing is they're actually benefiting the elk population, the deer population, through keeping the ecosystem in balance. However, unfortunately in the western states, it all comes down to money.
Ewelt explains that eliminating the wolf population from the ecosystem and creating that ecosystem imbalance he speaks of results in things like the elk, moose, and deer populations getting overpopulated and basically out of control. Then that overpopulation results in these animals leaving their habitat in the hills, and instead they graze at bodies of water like lakes or rivers, for example, thus eliminating crucial vegetation. And then when that vegetation is gone, the area where the land and water connect is not protected. And Ewelt says that's when fish are killed off and the entire ecosystem, in his words, is threatened. So now Ewelt says Zoo Montana collaborates with Relist Wolves to educate people of all ages who visit his zoo that wolves must be treated with care and compassion. Ewelt says connecting with wolves is part of the answer to saving them.
Try to take the political aspect out of it and make a decision for yourself and understand why every animal on this planet, from the tiniest mosquito to the amazing wolf, has a role to play. We may not want to admit that as humans, but it's true. Every single animal on this planet is here for a particular reason.